You're not chasing freedom. You're chasing the feeling of being a good worker. Wake up early, hydrate, get sunlight, clear your inbox, crush that workout, check off your goals, stack habits like building blocks to a better self. But stop for a second. Why does everything you do, from brushing your teeth to building your side hustle, feel like an unpaid internship for a life you haven't even interviewed for yet? Let's call this what it is: slavery rebranded. Shined up, digitized, gamified, and fed back to you in pastel dashboards and self-help buzzwords. It's no longer about being whipped into submission. Now, you volunteer for it. You even feel bad when you don't. Here's the thing. You live in a system that rewards obedience, but calls it discipline. It sells you the fantasy of freedom, while quietly demanding compliance. And the cruelest trick of all, it teaches you to love the system that keeps you tired, anxious, and endlessly performing. Before we dive deeper, quick pause. If you're into this kind of financial/psychological truth-telling, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's been grinding so hard they forgot why they started. This channel unpacks how money, power, identity, and psychology get twisted together in ways you were never supposed to notice. Now back to it. Look around. Everyone's trying to optimize, to be more productive, to stop wasting time. But the real question isn't, am I being productive? It's, productive for who? Because productivity has never been neutral. It's always had a master. In ancient civilizations, productivity was enforced with whips and chains. The harder you worked, the more your owner profited. Today, your owner has shapeshifted. It's not a single man, it's a system that thrives on your anxiety, a system that whispers, "You're not doing enough," even as you're drowning in tasks. A system that turns your value into output, your worth into metrics, your life into content. And it all starts with this idea that to be valuable, you must produce something. Let that sink in, because that belief has been so deeply embedded in you that even your hobbies, your rest, your thoughts, your identity have been colonized by it. Painting? Turn it into a business. Walking? Track your steps. Journaling? Make it aesthetic and monetize your routine. Even your grief needs to be processed efficiently. Every inch of your inner life has been infiltrated by the logic of the factory floor. But here's where it gets darker. This system didn't just train you to work harder. It trained you to believe that working harder makes you morally better. You're not just productive, you're disciplined. You're not just busy, you're committed. You're not just compliant, you're successful. This is how obedience becomes invisible. This is how the modern system achieves what old slave masters could never dream of: a workforce that polices itself. You don't need guards. You don't need punishments. You have shame. You have guilt. You have that voice in your head that says, if I don't grind, I fall behind. And that voice? It doesn't sound like your boss. It sounds like you. This is why productivity is so seductive, because it gives you the illusion of agency while stealing your autonomy. You think you're building your dream life, but what you're really doing is feeding the machine. Let's talk about that machine. It's built on profit, but it survives on people who confuse movement for meaning. So you're rewarded for staying busy, even if what you're doing is meaningless. You get praise for your hustle, even if it's killing you. You feel proud of your discipline, even when it's just disguised fear of failure. And when you break down, there's an app for that. Track your habits, breathe, drink water. Optimize your burnout so you can go back to performing productivity again. It's a sick loop. And here's the catch. The more obedient you become, the more invisible the system gets. You stop questioning why you're working. You just ask how to do it better, faster, with more efficiency. But obedience isn't just about what you do. It's about what you don't do. You don't rest without guilt. You don't waste time without anxiety. You don't say no without explaining yourself. You've been taught that rest is laziness, that leisure is indulgent, that stillness is weakness. But what if none of that is true? What if the system depends on you believing those lies? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A system that profits from your productivity has no interest in your freedom. It just wants you functional, optimized, controllable. So it sells you the fantasy of freedom through the language of self-improvement. It packages slavery as structure. It calls obedience alignment. It turns your life into a spreadsheet and calls it purpose. This is the quiet violence of modern life. And it starts young. You're taught in school to sit still, follow rules, do tasks, not to question systems or understand yourself. You're taught to obey and to smile while doing it. And as you grow up, that obedience becomes more subtle. It's no longer a teacher scolding you. It's your calendar, your metrics, your fear of falling behind. You internalize the system. You become your own supervisor. And the worst part, you thank it. You think it's helping you become your best self. But what if it's just turning you into your most profitable one? Here's what you need to ask. Who benefits from you believing that your worth is tied to your output? Who profits when you grind yourself down in the name of success? Because the truth is, productivity isn't about you. It's about control. And the sooner you see that, the sooner you can start breaking free.
You weren't born craving productivity. You were trained to. And to understand how deep that training runs, you have to go back. Not to your childhood, but to the machines that shaped it. The entire way you think about time, value, and effort is rooted in an old invention, the factory. Before industrialization, people didn't wake up by alarms. They rose with the sun. They didn't organize their lives into 30-minute blocks. They moved with the rhythms of the land, the body, the season. Work was part of life, but not the point of it. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly the clock ruled everything. Factory owners didn't just want workers, they wanted predictable workers, interchangeable parts, efficient hands, bodies that showed up, shut up, and did what they were told. So they engineered more than machines. They engineered behavior. That's when time became money. That's when lateness became a moral failing. That's when your value became miserable. And guess what? The factory wasn't just a building. It became the blueprint for schools. Classrooms were designed to mimic factory floors. Rows of desks, bells to mark time. Memorize, repeat, obey. You weren't being educated, you were being programmed. Programmed to sit for hours, to respond to authority, to suppress boredom, fatigue, and defiance, to perform for grades the same way you'd later perform for paychecks. You weren't learning how to think, you were learning how to comply. This is where your relationship with productivity began, as a system of domestication. And it didn't end when you graduated. It just got more expensive. College, internships, unpaid work,
all framed as investments in your future. But what they really did was deepen your compliance reflex. They taught you to wait, to delay pleasure, to tolerate overwork, to earn your right to exist. This is why even now, years later, you can't relax. You feel guilty doing nothing. You confuse rest with laziness. You feel safer when you're busy, because your nervous system has been molded by centuries of machinery, and you don't even notice it. Let's talk about the to-do list. On the surface, it looks harmless, helpful even. A list of things to accomplish. Simple, clean, satisfying. But beneath that surface is something darker. The to-do list isn't neutral. It's a behavioral leash. It rewards you for producing. It punishes you with anxiety when tasks pile up. It turns your day into a series of micro-achievements. And worse, it becomes part of your identity. How often have you felt more valuable just because you were on top of things? How often have you used busyness to avoid discomfort, intimacy, or rest? How often have you mistaken motion for meaning? Here's the trap. You start thinking that your to-do list reflects your discipline, but what it really reflects is your conditioning. You've been trained to seek external validation, to feel worthy only when you're productive, to define your success by completion, not connection, not curiosity, not joy. This is where the old machinery shows up in modern life. The tools have changed, but the logic hasn't. Alarms, schedules, KPIs, productivity apps, digital calendars, weekly reviews, morning routines. Everything is designed to maximize output and minimize resistance. But output for what? That question is dangerous. It cuts through the trance, because the system doesn't want you to pause and reflect. It wants you to optimize and perform. That's why so many productivity tools are designed like games, streaks, badges, progress bars. They hijack your dopamine systems. They rewire your focus. They make you chase artificial rewards, just like slot machines. But there's no jackpot, just more to do, more goals, more opportunities. And when you burn out, that's your fault, apparently. You didn't plan right. You didn't set clear enough goals. You didn't download the right app. Never mind that the system was designed to break you, to extract your energy, attention, and time, to keep you busy enough to never ask, what's this all for? Let's zoom out again. The whole idea of productivity rests on a toxic assumption that your time should always be used, that empty space is waste, that effort equals virtue. But nature doesn't operate that way. Neither do children, or artists, or spiritual traditions. Only machines do. And you are not a machine. You're not meant to be in a constant state of output. You need friction, stillness, play. But the system taught you to fear all that, because stillness creates awareness, and awareness threatens obedience. Think about that. The more still you become, the more you notice how hollow your routines feel, how empty your metrics are, how disconnected you are from anything that truly matters. This is not accidental, it's structural, because stillness breaks the spell. It allows you to ask forbidden questions. Why am I really doing this? Who am I trying to please? What would I be without the checklist? And those questions lead to rebellion. Not loud rebellion, not quitting your job tomorrow and going off grid, but internal rebellion. A refusal to tie your worth to your efficiency. A refusal to live as if you're a line item on someone else's spreadsheet. This is where real freedom starts. Not with more productivity, not with better systems, but with radical self-awareness. You were trained to obey time. Now, it's time to unlearn.
You weren't just trained to obey. You were trained to optimize yourself, as if you were a product. The system realized something clever. You don't have to imprison people if they internalize the rules. You just convince them that freedom means becoming a better version of themselves, constantly. And so begins the illusion of the self as a project, not a soul, not a life, not a complex living organism, but a brand, a prototype, a checklist of upgrades. Here's how it works. Every insecurity becomes a sales funnel. Every flaw becomes a marketing opportunity. You're too anxious? Buy this course. Not confident enough? Read these 5 books. Can't focus? Try cold plunges and lion's mane and dopamine detox. In this economy, your pain is never something to sit with. It's a problem to fix, because fixing makes you functional again. And functionality equals productivity, and productivity equals profit. Not always for you, but definitely for someone. You become a self-improvement hamster on a self-improvement wheel, always one tweak away from worthiness, one breakthrough away from finally being enough. But here's the trick. You're never meant to arrive, because the moment you do, the entire market collapses. So the bar moves, again and again and again. This is why you keep feeling like you're behind, even as you do all the right things. The journaling, the meditation, the fitness, the vision boards. It never feels like arrival. It just feels like you're keeping up. Because that's the point. You're not building a life. You're managing one. Like an employee. Like a brand. Like a performance. And it's not just the influencers or the courses or the apps. It's deeper than that. It's the way you've been taught to speak about yourself. I'm working on myself. I'm becoming the best version of me. I'm fixing my mindset. All these phrases sound empowering, but listen closely. They carry the same implication. You're not okay as you are. Even self-love becomes a performance. Even healing becomes content. You take your most intimate struggles, wrap them in aesthetic, and post them as proof that you're on the path, proof that you're making progress, proof that you're productive, even with your pain. But healing doesn't happen on a timeline. And you don't need to earn rest by first becoming better. This is the subtle violence of the personal growth industry. It keeps you chasing worthiness by pretending it's liberation. Because a person who's at peace with themselves, a person who rests without guilt, a person who doesn't constantly feel behind, that's a threat to the system. Because they don't buy as much. They don't chase status. They don't need as much validation. And worst of all, they're harder to control. So what does the system do? It reframes obedience as ambition. You think you're building your dream life, but what you're really building is a fortress around your anxiety. You track habits not because they feel good, but because without them you feel like a failure. You set goals not because they excite you, but because drifting feels dangerous. You wake up early, hustle, journal, grind, not for joy, for survival. Because deep down, you believe this: If I stop improving, I'll fall behind. If I stop performing, I'll be forgotten. If I stop fixing myself, I'll be unlovable. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It was programmed into you. The culture of productivity needs you to feel broken, because broken people are busy people. And busy people don't question power. They don't notice who's profiting. They don't realize that their pain is being harvested. They just keep grinding. And here's the darkest part. You start treating other people the way you treat yourself. You commodify your relationships. You expect performance from your friends. You rank people by usefulness, status, or discipline. You even look down on people who don't hustle as hard as you. Because when you've internalized your value as output, it's hard to see others as anything more. This is the system reproducing itself through you. And that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to see it. To realize that your worth is not a graph, not a schedule, not a routine, not a brand. You are not a project. You are not a machine that needs constant upgrading. You don't have to be better to be worthy of ease. What you do need is honesty, clarity, stillness. To ask, who taught me to hate my unproductive self? Who benefits when I see rest as laziness? Who profits from my endless self-surveillance? Because here's the truth. The system doesn't want you to feel peace. It wants you to seek peace forever. Chasing peace sells more products than having it. And that's the game. Every app, every guru, every system is just another way of saying, you're not enough yet. But if you do this, maybe. But maybe the most radical thing you can do isn't to work harder. It's to stop trying to become a product. Because you're not here to impress. You're here to exist. Fully, quietly, messily, without a productivity report attached.
Let's get real. You say you grind for purpose, passion, discipline, but look closer. You grind because you're afraid of stopping, because stopping feels like dying, because rest feels like failure. This isn't ambition, it's worship. Worship of the grind. And like all worship, it comes with rituals. Early mornings, 2 phones, no days off, earn your rest, sleep when you're dead. You wear your burnout like armor, as if exhaustion proves you're worthy, as if collapsing at the end of each day means you're winning. But here's the paradox. The more productive you become, the more worthless you feel. Why? Because in a system that equates your value with your output, you can never do enough. There's always another milestone, another task, another level. You could build the perfect routine, eat clean, lift heavy, journal daily, close every ring, and still feel behind. Because this system isn't designed for fulfillment, it's designed for extraction. So the grind doesn't reward you, it uses you. And it teaches you to use yourself. Here's the psychological trick. You think you're in control. You're choosing the hustle, right? But is it really a choice if your sense of self-worth depends on it? That's not freedom. That's a trauma loop. And most people are trapped in it. Grinding not because they love the work, but because they fear who they'll be without it. Let's talk about what the grind actually gives you. Structure. When life feels chaotic, routines feel like safety. Not emotional safety, control. If everything else is spinning, at least your schedule isn't. Identity. You're the disciplined one, the focused one, the one who gets it done. Even if you're breaking inside, at least you're achieving. Status. Burnout is now social currency. Tell someone you're overworked and they'll admire you. They'll say, "Damn, you're killing it." You might be, but not in the way they mean. This is why the grind is so seductive. It gives you clarity in a world that makes no sense. It gives you purpose in a culture that feels hollow. It gives you proof that you matter, even if only in metrics. But at what cost? You sacrifice relationships because they don't scale. You sacrifice your body because healing takes time. You sacrifice your presence because the future always demands more. And worst of all, you sacrifice yourself. The soft parts, the curious parts, the playful, creative, spontaneous parts that don't fit in a planner. Those parts die first, because the grind doesn't make space for joy. It only makes space for performance. So you become an actor, smiling through exhaustion, posting wins while breaking down, saying all good when you don't even know what that means anymore. And when the breakdown comes, you blame yourself, not the system, not the culture, not the grind. You say, "I need better time management. I need to level up. I just need to push through." No, you need to stop. But stopping feels impossible because the grind is no longer something you do, it's who you are. That's the terrifying part. You spent so long optimizing, tracking, managing, and performing, you've forgotten what it feels like to just be. To be slow, to be useless, to be unproductive and still loved. And that's the lie you were never supposed to question, that your worth is conditional, that you must earn your right to exist. This lie starts young. Remember how school rewarded the quiet kid who followed the rules? Remember how the kid who asked why too much was a problem? Now imagine growing up in that system for 20 years. What does that do to your sense of self? It splits you into a performer and a prisoner. One smiles and produces, the other quietly suffocates. And eventually, the performer becomes the mask you never take off. So when you rest, you feel guilty. When you play, you feel aimless. When you stop performing, you feel like no one. But what if that emptiness isn't a sign you failed? What if it's the space where your real self is waiting? The one who doesn't need to crush it. The one who's not a brand. The one who doesn't need to monetize every breath. That self doesn't live in the grind. It lives in the pause. But pausing is dangerous because it forces you to feel. And if you feel too much, you might realize how deeply tired you are, how disconnected, how used. And the system cannot let you feel that because a feeling worker is a rebellious one. So it keeps you moving. One more project, one more hack, one more high-performance habit. Just enough forward motion to avoid introspection. But here's the truth. You don't need more productivity. You need permission to rest, to be messy, to not have a 5-year plan. You need permission to be human, because the grind will never love you back. It will only take until there's nothing left to optimize but your exit.
Look around your home screen. Productivity has been outsourced to apps. Your calendar tells you where to be. Your reminders tell you who to text. Your fitness app tells you if you're allowed to feel proud of your body today. You're not in control. You're being managed by a dashboard. We used to call this micromanagement. Now we call it accountability. But here's what's really happening. You've replaced one boss with another. Only now, it lives in your pocket, and it never sleeps. The shift is subtle but brutal. Old systems used external control, supervisors, bells, routines. Modern systems weaponize internal control. You don't need someone breathing down your neck when your phone can do it better. Notifications, badges, streaks, they reward your obedience with dopamine. Not joy, not meaning, just chemical nudges that keep you on task. And this is the terrifying part. You like it. You like seeing a streak hit 100 days. You like being told you're on track. You like when your to-do list turns green. Because you've been conditioned to mistake validation for peace. Let's talk psychology. When Pavlov trained his dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell, he was demonstrating conditioning. Do a task, get a reward. Repeat the cycle enough, and the bell alone becomes addictive. You've been Pavloved by productivity apps, except your bell is a ping. Your reward is a metric. And your salivation? That's the subtle panic you feel when you fall behind. Modern productivity tools don't serve you. They shape you. They teach you to measure everything. Every minute, every rep, every word typed. And once something is measurable, it becomes judgeable. You start asking, was that hour productive enough? Was that walk long enough? Was that thought deep enough? You stop living. You start optimizing. And the apps don't just measure your behavior. They dictate your values. An app tells you it's better to write 500 words a day than sit in quiet thought. It tells you it's better to check 10 boxes than spend 10 minutes just being present. It tells you you're succeeding because the bar charts say so. But what does any of it mean? You've been sold the fantasy of flow states and habit stacks and atomic routines. But the end result isn't a free life. It's a perfectly efficient cage. And here's the most twisted part. You built it yourself. You downloaded the tools. You followed the gurus. You rewarded yourself for being managed. You voluntarily became your own warden. Why? Because control feels safer than freedom. Control is predictable. Freedom is uncertain. Control gives you metrics. Freedom gives you silence. And silence is dangerous, because in silence, you have to feel. Feel the fatigue, the emptiness, the buried questions. What am I doing this for? Who taught me that discipline equals dignity? Why am I afraid of being still? But you rarely get to those questions because the system keeps you busy with apps. It keeps you tweaking routines, perfecting workflows, color-coding calendars like it's therapy. This is the illusion of control. You think you're steering the ship, but really you're just organizing the cargo while someone else charts the course. And who benefits? Not you. The platforms, the corporations, the content farms, the productivity industrial complex that profits every time you confuse motion for progress. Even your so-called mindfulness apps are part of it. They tell you to meditate, just enough to stop panicking, not enough to wake up. They help you manage stress, not dismantle its source. They train you to cope, not confront. Because if you ever truly confronted the system, you might start asking why your peace has to be scheduled, why you can't relax without an app giving you permission, why you need an interface to feel human. This is what happens when your sense of self is outsourced. You no longer know how to feel accomplished without a ping. You don't trust your own rhythms. You don't believe you've earned rest unless a number tells you so. You've become alienated from yourself. Not in the dramatic sense, in the daily, ordinary sense. You don't know what you want. You only know what's due. You don't know how you feel. You only know what needs fixing. This is the end game of productivity culture. Not efficiency, not mastery, but disconnection. And once you're disconnected, you're easier to manipulate, easier to sell to, easier to distract, easier to keep in the loop of not enough yet. You'll chase better habits, cleaner routines, sharper mindsets, always thinking you're leveling up, never realizing you're circling the same drain. Because here's the ugly truth. The more you optimize yourself, the less of you is left. The edges get sanded down. The weirdness gets scrubbed out. The wild, uncontrollable human parts get managed into non-existence. You become a system of inputs and outputs, and the system loves that. Because now it can predict you, scale you, sell you. But you start to feel like a ghost inside your schedule. Maybe that's what all this is, a slow ghosting of the self, disguised as growth. And maybe the most radical thing you can do is not delete the apps, but disobey them. Not with rage, with refusal. To refuse optimization, to refuse the ping, to refuse to let your value be tracked like a stock. Because you were never meant to be a metric. You were meant to be free.
Let's be brutally honest. If you're waiting for the world to give you permission to slow down, you'll be dead before it happens. Because the system doesn't care if you break. It only cares that you don't stop. You can delete the productivity apps, you can toss the planner, but if your internal voice still equates rest with laziness, you're not free. You're just unmonitored. Here's the paradox. Escaping this loop doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing something that isn't predicated on proving your worth. Rest isn't the opposite of productivity. It's the refusal to obey a machine that demands your constant output. It's the radical act of being useless to an economy that only values you when you're producing. True freedom isn't waking up at 5 a.m. to crush goals. It's waking up and realizing you don't have to be a goal in the first place. Let the algorithm starve. Let your metrics die. Start asking a better question than, how do I get more done? Try, what am I really doing all this for? If your answer is silence, good. Now you're finally free to hear yourself.